So 2016, I decided to join Horton Church Lake, and it was a weird decision because I'd always fished for a singular big fish in the past, but I fancied going somewhere that gave me a chance of, you know, even the backup fish being 40 pounders. So with that in mind, I joined RK Leisure's Horton. The lake itself is about 14 to 16 acres, averages about 15 to 20 foot. It's quite a deep lake. Lots of weed beds, lots of little gravel patches and things like that. Really interesting lake. Stock's probably around, I think, around 70 fish, with at least 22 to 25 of them being 40 pounders, and maybe 2 of them 50 pound at the right time of the year. Really incredible stock. Yeah, so everyone was fishing single hook baits and chods, things like that, bright visible hook baits. And I knew I needed to think outside of the box if I was going to get among the fish. And I started to bait up with not a lot of bait, 10 or 15 spoms. And the first session back after fishing a pre-baited spot, I managed to hook a fish. And unfortunately I lost it, and it turned out to be the biggest fish in the lake. It was caught with my hook link in its mouth about 3 weeks later. Yeah, so I'd lost this big fish, and I was gutted, and I only had the Monday off on the week after. So I thought I'm going to do a day session. It meant doing a 160-mile round trip on the M25, but I thought, sod it, I'm going to do it. So I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, got down to Horton, got back in the swim I'd baited, and right down the other end of the lake I see a fish stick his head out. And I thought, you would be down there, wouldn't you? And I was like, chucked everything back on the barra, went all the way around the lake, got there, and another one, a real lump, just nutted out right in front of me. So I didn't mess around. I put 2 pouchfuls of hybrid out and just cast on top of it. There was nothing technical to it. One was a chod, one was a stiff link, and I put the rods down. They'd been in the water 20 minutes, and the right-hand rod's just torn off, and I've got this fish in. It's a 20 pound fully scaled, and I was pleased, you know, just to get off the mark, and it was a Horton fish. And I've done a couple of photos, slipped it back. As it's swimming off, the left-hand rod's gone. I couldn't believe it, so I've picked up this, definitely a better fish, stayed heavy till eventually I managed to slip it over the net. I looked in there and I knew it was a 40 pounder, and it 40 pound 10 I think it weighed, a fish called Chips. So yeah, I was off the mark on the day session, and I could have left it there really. I was well happy. About an hour later, the rod's gone again. This time, really deep, heavy fight again. Another 40 pounder in the net, 44 pound. I couldn't believe it. And so after catching, you know, 3 fish in a day out of Horton and losing one the previous session, I got a bit cocksure on myself, and I thought, maybe Horton ain't as hard as I originally thought it was going to be. And it really did kick me in the balls, because I went the next month without a fish. And I tried everything. I moved on them, I baited spots and got on it. But a lot of the problem was, it is a circuit wall, it is busy, and you can't always get on the fish. But I don't give up. I just see that as part of the hurdle that I have to get over. Sometimes the crowds are that hurdle. So eventually, it got warmer and the weeds started to come up. This was sort of end of May time, so I'd got a month without a fish. And there was an area with a pontoon. And I noticed no one seemed to fish that end of the lake. So what I started to do was bait the end of the pontoon. And it was about a couple of weeks I'd been baiting it. And I finished work at about 4 in the morning. I'd been on a night shift, and I drove around the M25. And I stood in the pontoon swim, and I thought, if I see one, I'm going to fish. Wherever it shows on the lake, I'm going to get on it. And right where I'd put all this bait, this big dark mirrorback come out, and I thought, great. So I pulled out the rod, and I whacked a chod rig about 30 yards past the fish, reeled it back, and when it come into the zone, I just let it drop down onto the weed, knowing that that chod had hit that top bead. So with one rod in the zone, I just flicked the right-hand rod anywhere just to get it in the water. The rods have been out less than 5 minutes, and the bobbin cracked against the alarm, and I'm fishing braid. It's a real vicious take, and I'm on the rod. And when I say this fish fought hard, it was like unbelievable. Had me in 2 or 3 different weed beds, and it was almost harrowing. Eventually I managed to bundle this big old mirror into the net, and it was after 5 weeks without catching one. Anyway, it turned out to be a fish called Scar, and it was 46 pound 12 ounces, and I was absolutely buzzing. So I was like, my last 3 bites had been 40 pounders. It was crazy. And yeah, I knew I had something with this little pontoon area, so rather than fish it for the day and risk spooking it, I put a little bit more bait in and I went and fished somewhere else on the lake for the rest of the 24 hours and didn't catch anything. I got back a week later and it was crazy because it was almost a mirror image of what had happened the week before. I stood in the pontoon, a big mirror rolled, I cast a chod out 30 yards past where it rolled, reeled it back into the zone, let it drop down. This time I didn't even get the other rod out and the bobbin has cracked up against the alarm, and again I'm doing battle with this proper angry fish. And I remember as this fish come past me in the water, I looked at it and I thought, I don't believe this, it's another 40 pounder. Played it out, got her on the scales, 44 pound 4 ounces. I just couldn't believe me luck, you know what I mean, to have that many big fish, 4 40s in a row. I decided that session that I would stay in the swim because the sun was out, and when I walked onto the end of the pontoon there was a few fish about still, and about an hour after that fish I managed to catch a fish called Lucy. Oh, bit of a liner there. 32 pound. Funny enough, it was my first Horton 30, so I'd now had 4 40s and this was my first 32 pounds I think it was. Beautiful carp. Nothing else happened that session, and next time down I put some bait in. I got down, and to be fair, cut a long story short, I never got near that area again in months. There was a couple of lads doing a lot of time, and they sort of sat and swim up and fished it from a different angle, and funnily enough caught nothing. So they were the last fish out there that I knew of for the year. But yeah, I think it was around June now, and it was weird. We had some easterly winds coming and it had been cold all week, and when I got down to Horton for that session, someone said to me, there hasn't been a bite in 2 weeks. You think June time's really weird. And I walked round the lake and this easterly wind, it was almost cutting. And I see a fish roll right in the teeth of it, and I was hoping they'd be on the back of the wind because it was warm. But there they were, right on this cold wind. Anyway, I got set up, got the rods out, about, I think it was about 16 wraps in the swim called to look at. Got a bit of bait on the spot. It didn't feel well. I'd worked all night again and I felt really rough. And it was the first time I was the only one on the lake. And I remember zipping the bivvy door up and trying to sleep off this like bug that I had. And I remember I fell asleep and I slept really heavy, and the next thing I knew I woke up and my left hand rod was in absolute meltdown. I've run out, grabbed over it. By now the weed is up to the surface in some areas, and it was one of them, you know, it's like that, grinding it all the way in. The braid was cutting through the weed. I rolled this fish eventually into the net, and when I looked in, there's this really dark, long mirror. A lot of the Horton fish are short, chunky fish, but this was a nice long one. Ended up being a fish called Scully at 40 pounds and 4 ounces. So it was my 5th 40 by June, and yeah, to say I was blown away is an understatement. You know, I was absolutely buzzing. I knew the bait was rocking. Wherever I put the bait, they just seemed to, you know, they come in and they wanted it, and my confidence was sky high. And honestly, my jaw drops open when I see this thing. Just as I'm about to celebrate with this beer, the rod's gone into meltdown. 50 pound 2 ounces. A fish called Roger the Dodger. Lovely big dark mirror. Yeah, it was just the icing on the cake. It was like the best years probably angling I've had in 10 years at least, maybe in my life.